Tonight on Bridge City News, an MLA in Medicine Hat has said his constituents do not want to see a supervised consumption site in his city. The federal Liberals now have a candidate in Lethbridge. We will introduce you to Amy Bronson. And WestJet will soon have new owners and become a private company. Details coming up in business.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. We begin tonight with a Lethbridge man who's on his way to prison after he was sentenced to a total of 4 years behind bars for 16 federal and provincial offenses. 28-year-old Logan Drake pleaded guilty to all 16 charges that were related to drugs and dangerous driving. 3 of the most serious offenses are for what will likely be permanent injuries to a couple in their late 70s. The man and his wife were traveling from the Yukon towards the U.S. border on November 12th of 2018 when a stolen truck driven by Drake struck them at a high rate of speed, causing severe injuries.
Just recently, through the court process, Mr. Drake has been convicted of offenses that included possession of property obtained by crime, where he received a 6-month jail term, and he was also convicted of dangerous driving causing bodily harm, 3 counts, and he was given a 24-month jail term plus a 2-year driver's license suspension.
A Pincher Creek home located on the Summerview feedlot was targeted for a recent break-and-enter. The incident occurred last Friday at 6 a.m. The unknown suspect stole a firearm with ammunition that was locked in a storage room along with some meat from a freezer. Now, with the increase in rural break-and-enters, Staff Sergeant Glenn Henry with the Coaldale RCMP shares some tips that will help the police return recovered items a lot quicker.
One of the things that really helps the RCMP when we do our investigations is that if these businesses in particular identify the items that could be stolen, so they have serial numbers. If it's vehicle stolen, that's easy, but other things like tools, that kind of stuff, if they mark their property, we're in a better position to, when we recover it, to relocate it back to the original owners, plus allows us to charge people.
Safe consumption sites can be found in many cities across North America, including right here in Lethbridge. In our city, the latest stats show needle distribution rates are down 70% and return rates are up 83% since Arches opened just over a year ago. Cypress Medicine Hat MLA Drew Barnes does not want to see a safe consumption site in Medicine Hat. Barnes has written a letter to Health Minister Tyler Shandro asking that a safe consumption site not be placed in his community. He says after hearing from constituents, they would prefer funds be used towards counseling and enhanced detox services. Barnes says the development of the site of Medicine Hat needs to be suspended until the issue can be discussed further. Medicine Hat Mayor Ted Clugston says he's happy with the Barnes is handling the matter, as said council is staying out of the supervised consumption site debate altogether. An Alberta company that designs target systems for militaries around the world has landed a huge contract with the Canadian Armed Forces. Kinetic Target Systems landed the $51 million deal to develop a new unmanned aerial system for the military. The work will be done in Medicine Hat. A spokesperson for Kinetic says once the system is operational, it'll be used for surveillance, intelligence, and reconnaissance missions. The equipment will be controlled remotely. The contract will allow the company, which employs 51 people, to expand its operations and hire an additional 30 staff. Driving to Calgary, you may have seen the graphic pro-life ads on the sides of a couple of tractor trailers. Apparently that's a no-no with the Municipal District of Foothills, which prohibits trailer billboard signs on the sides of highways even when placed on private property. The ads, which read, "Canada has no abortion laws," and "Pregnant? Need help? You are not alone. Need to be taken down," according to a Foothills Planning and Development officer. The rural landowners who hold pro-life views have refused and have now hired the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms to represent their case. Justice Centre President John Carpe says the applicants are saying the bylaw infringes freedom of expression as protected under the Charter and is therefore unconstitutional. Carpe says trailer billboard signs along highways are an effective means of communicating and should not be censored through bylaws. Vet clinics are warning people to keep an eye out on their pets. Warm weather is on the horizon, but the increase in temperatures also means increased activity for some of Alberta's least favorite creepy crawlies.
Tick season in Alberta is year-long because ticks can be active from 4 degrees Celsius and above. So anytime that it's warm, even when a Chinook blows through, there's always that risk that pets could be picking up ticks. There's a lot of really good tick preventives for dogs and for cats that you can get through any veterinary practice in town. Also, the ticks that we see generally in this area aren't the ones that carry Lyme disease. The one that carries Lyme disease is the Ixodes tick that we are seeing some in this area. If you do have a tick on your pet, or you find one in the house that your dog brings in, oh my goodness, you can always bring the dog down or cat down to the veterinary practice where they can remove it.
Goodfellow says you can remove it yourself or ensure the tick is taken to a practice that would submit it to a provincial program in Alberta where they can identify it. When it comes to organ donations, Canada ranks just 23rd in the world. According to the National Kidney Foundation, 16 to 17 people die every day while waiting for transplant of a vital organ. The annual Kidney Walk took place at Henderson Lake on Saturday in support of those who suffer from the disease and for families who've lost a loved one. For some, it was a very emotional day.
We had some time to say goodbye before they shut off his life support. And so I said, what about organ donation? Is he a candidate for that? And they were like, he's not a registered donor, we already checked. And I said, yeah, I know, but that's just because of who he is, that he's not a registered donor. And so they talked about it. It turned out that he was really the ideal organ donor. His brain function had ceased, but his heart had never stopped beating before they got him on life support. So he was really the ideal organ donor. And so that sort of just started the whole process.
The number of organ donor registrations has been increasing across Canada. The Lethbridge Walk raised over $20,000. A group of bikers in Lethbridge are passionate about supporting family and youth in our community as Bikers Building Bridges hosted a fun event over the weekend. The Mamapalooza event took place Saturday at the Interfaith Food Bank. It was an event supported by Woods Homes and over a dozen local sponsors. The group says bringing people together is what it's all about.
I think sometimes we get caught up just doing things on our own instead of being a group or a community, and it just builds a stronger Lethbridge, a stronger place for us to live and a stronger place for our children, and that is what Bikers Building Bridges is about, youth at risk, and the way to stop them from being at risk is by being with them and showing them positive influence. Volunteering in your community is positive influence, and the more they see us do it, the more they're going to want to do it.
Bikers Building Bridges will be hosting another event next month, which they say will raise money for the Alberta Children's Hospital in Calgary. A professor from McGill University will be presented with an honorary degree during the University of Lethbridge Spring Convocation Ceremony on May 31st. Dr. Cindy Blackstock is being recognized for her work addressing issues facing Indigenous children. She spent her career speaking out against the inequalities of services provided to First Nations youth and their families. Blackstock is a member of a First Nation, has written more than 50 publications, and won awards for her work in protecting the rights of First Nations children. The Liberal Party has nominated a Lethbridge woman for this fall's upcoming federal election. Amy Bronson is a management consultant with a master's degree in global affairs. Bronson has worked with the local Rotary Club on projects across the globe and is passionate about presenting Lethbridge as an economic leader. Bronson says she will support our region's agricultural industries and small businesses, grow the economy, and protect the environment. She also supports investing in the potential of young people, ensuring that seniors enjoy dignified retirement, and furthering reconciliation with First Nations. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in Edmonton recently, meeting with Edmonton Mayor Don Iveson. He discussed new job numbers and addressed the recent Alberta election, along with prospects for his Liberals in the upcoming federal election.
In April, Canadians created over 100,000 jobs, and 21,000 of those new jobs were created right here in Alberta. Because we chose to invest in Canadians, we're seeing steady economic growth, record level job creation, and we've lifted 825,000 people and counting out of poverty. I recognize that people have gone through very difficult years, and there is always a temptation for politicians at campaign time to exacerbate or stretch out or amplify fears, concerns, and anxieties. But my approach has always been to work with our partners at the municipal level, at the provincial level, to look for ways to serve citizens, to deliver the tangible benefits that citizens so deeply need. That is going to be our approach here in Alberta and right across the country.
You hear many stories in the mainstream media today about white supremacy. You also hear the federal Liberals use the term quite a bit. John Robson is a National Post columnist. He says our Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, is incorrect making white supremacy such a major issue. Robson says there are much more serious threats in the world right now.
Around the world, something like 20,000 people a year are killed by terrorists. And very, very few of them are killed by white nationalists. In most countries, none at all. And what I thought was especially odd about this is that she seemed to be thinking only about Western countries and the things that happen here. That in a way, most of those people are invisible to her because the attacks happen in countries like Nigeria. And it seems so strange that our very globally minded, very woke foreign minister would just brush aside thousands of deaths. So, well, that doesn't interest us very much.
Watch the full interview with Mr. Robson discussing threats, including why there's such a rise in anti-Semitism. That's coming up in the second half of our show. Legendary Hollywood actress and singer Doris Day died today at the age of 97. Day had an incredible movie career which spanned 6 decades.
Doris Day, whose wholesome screen presence stood for a time of innocence in 60s films, has died. The Doris Day Animal Foundation confirmed Day died early Monday at her home in Carmel Valley, California. The foundation says in an emailed statement she was surrounded by close friends and had been in excellent health for her age until recently contracting a serious case of pneumonia. The honey-voiced singer and actress's film dramas, musicals and innocent sex comedies made her a top star in the 1950s and 60s and among the most popular screen actresses in history. Day's lilting voice, wholesome blonde beauty and ultra-bright smile brought her a string of hits, first on records, later in Hollywood. She celebrated her 97th birthday on April 3rd. Lizzie Knight for the Associated Press.
She had an amazing career. Mexican authorities discovered the remains of 35 people in mass graves in the violent Jalisco state on the central Pacific coast. Officials say most of the remains were found at a ranch in the town of Zapopan. Police say 27 of the bodies had been tied up when killed. Police say 7 other human remains were found in Guadalajara, Mexico's second most populous city. More than 40,000 people have gone missing and presumed dead since Mexico's war on drugs was militarized with federal troops in 2006. More than 250,000 people have been killed in violent crimes in Mexico since then. As the opioid crisis rages around the world, clinical trials in China are being held using brain surgery to help those with their drug addiction. As we hear in this next report, the first North American trial could begin next month.
Desperation has brought Mr. Yan to this hospital in Shanghai. He's hoping brain surgery will cure his addiction to drugs. Mr. Yan asked us not to use his full name or show his face because he's afraid of losing his job. He's the first person to undergo deep brain stimulation, or DBS, for methamphetamine addiction in a clinical trial at Regine Hospital.
等于就是只要身上一有闲，就有心情就去玩这个东西。然后我觉得就自己就觉得没什么意义的人，如果说这样活着的话，就真的没意义，是吧？
DBS has long been used for movement disorders like Parkinson's disease and is increasingly being used to treat psychiatric conditions like severe cases of obsessive-compulsive disorder or OCD.
It's connected to the lead in the patient's brain.
The surgery involves implanting a device that works like a pacemaker, using electrodes implanted in the brain to stimulate targeted areas. There are currently 8 registered DBS clinical trials for drug addiction in the world, according to a U.S. government database. 6 are in China.
So for this kind of special psychiatric disorders, we have to use the human patients to do this study. We want to the DBS will give them hope.
China has been criticized in the past for its handling of drug addiction, including mandatory treatment centers run by the police and using a controversial brain surgery to curb drug use. Chinese researchers say DBS is less risky than the old brain surgeries because, in theory, it's reversible.
For the DBS, we know it's somehow equivalent to the ablation surgery, but it's safer.
The first U.S. clinical trial of DBS and opioids could begin in June. Megan Creed has been studying DBS on mice and says it's a promising option.
And I think given the crisis that we have with addiction right now, that the prospect of using DBS for addiction is important and very timely.
But Creed says surgery will not treat addiction on its own.
I do think that when used in combination with things like cognitive behavioral therapy, other classical treatments for addiction, that it can help patients. It can help them overcome some of that initial craving.
China's studies so far have offered mixed results, including a fatal heroin overdose after DBS. For Yan, he says surgery was the only chance to get his life back. 5 months later, he says he feels stronger. And is still off drugs. Erica Kienitz, Associated Press.
History was made in the NBA last night. It was the first time a buzzer beater was successfully made in a Game 7. Kawhi Leonard's last-second shot lifted the Toronto Raptors to a series win, 92-90, over the Philadelphia 76ers in Toronto. Kawhi Leonard said the shot was the highlight of his career.
I knew I had some time to try to get some space rather than just catch and shoot the ball. But I ended up catching it and just trying to get to a space so I get the shot off, like you said, and B was guarding me. He's taller, longer than me, so, end up finding a spot that I, like, that I work on. I end up getting to a spot, and I just knew I had to shoot it high. That's something I never experienced before, Game 7, game-winning shot. So it was, a blessing to just be able to, get to that point and make that shot and feel that moment. And it's something, I could look back on in my career.
Congrats going out to Canada's NBA team, the Toronto Raptors. Now let's see if they can go all the way. We had lots of sunshine again today and warm. Enjoy the warmth, for more rain and cooler temperatures are on the way. Complete weather details are coming up. We had another summer-like day today with lots of sunshine and warm temps. Tonight, a slight chance of showers developing with a low near 7. Tomorrow, partly cloudy with a balmy high of 25. Mainly sunny and 24 degrees for Wednesday. The clouds and showers return on Thursday with the mercury dropping to 12. Rain and 12 degrees as well for Friday. Saturday, light showers and a high of 9. Sunday, more rain developing and a high near 10 degrees. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 18 and an average low of 4. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1976 at 28 degrees, and the record low was -6 in 1943. Sunrise was at 5:50, sunset at 9:06. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, Victoria will have rain at 13. Pretty much the same picture for Vancouver. Expect a mixture of sun and cloud and 23 in Calgary tomorrow. A 30% chance of rain and 15 for Edmonton. 20 and mainly cloudy for Regina. Overcast and 18 for Saskatoon on Tuesday. Winnipeg will be mainly cloudy and 20. Showers and 14 for Toronto. Ottawa will have light showers and 9 degrees. Montreal will also receive rain and 9. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have rain and 4. Halifax, Nova Scotia will also have periods of rain and 6. Charlottetown, PEI will have showers and 7. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 9 degrees tomorrow. WestJet will soon have some new owners. The Calgary-based airline will become a private company owned by Onyx Corporation. The deal, if approved by shareholders, is valued at $5 billion. Onyx will pay $31 per share for WestJet. The airline shares closed at $18.52 on Friday. A special meeting of shareholders is expected to take place in July to vote on the transaction. WestJet's board of directors unanimously recommended shareholders vote in favor of the deal. It's expected to close later this year or in early 2020. Onyx, which is a private equity firm, manages $31 billion in assets. We now have some deflating news. Thanks in part to the global shortage of helium, 45 Party City stores are closing down across North America. No word yet if the Lethbridge location is closing. Now, it's not just affecting party supply stores, but everything from aerospace to the medical field. Helium is an essential chemical element used in MRI scanners, rocket fuel tanks, and floating party balloons. The 45 stores being closed represents about 5% of the Party City locations. It's official, Uber is now a publicly traded company. The initial offering price was $42 per share Friday, which was 7% lower than its initial public offering price. Many analysts predict, however, the price will recover and grow.
Yeah, I mean, there's general nervousness in the market. And when a company like Uber comes out public, it's really about where that demand is in terms of that bid-ask. You know, I think especially in terms of what we saw with Lyft and just these U.S.-China worries, I think there was a lot of pushing back in terms of where the stock was going to open. That's why you saw it open lower. At 45 is where institutional investors that bought the IPO get the stock. And ultimately, that's something that's set the night before, which is typical of IPOs. Look, no doubt, it's not ideal that an IPO comes out and breaks the IPO price in the first trade. But ultimately, how this trades over the coming weeks and months will be key in terms of what that supply-demand is for the stock.
The U.S.-China trade talks ended with no deal. U.S. President Donald Trump said there was no need to rush to get a deal done between the two world's biggest economies. Hours earlier, the Trump administration hiked tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports. China has retaliated by announcing plans today to raise tariffs on American goods ranging from beer and wine to swimsuits, shirts, and natural gas. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a Lethbridge man is on his way to prison after he was sentenced to a total of 4 years behind bars for 16 federal and provincial offenses. 28-year-old Logan Drake pleaded guilty to all 16 charges that were related to drugs and dangerous driving. 3 of the most serious offenses are for what will likely be a permanent and debilitating injuries to a couple in their late 70s. The man and his wife were traveling from the Yukon towards the U.S. border on November 12th of 2018 when a stolen truck driven by Drake struck them at a very high rate of speed, causing the injuries. White supremacy is not much of an issue as the mainstream media is making it out to be. Now that's according to National Post columnist John Robson. John has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come to the Nikayuko Japanese Garden for Victoria Day on Monday, May 20th. From 10 a.m. to 7 p.m., enjoy fun activities for the whole family, such as guided tours, kite making, minyo dancing, and try an Okinawa donut. For more details, visit nikayuko.com. Come out and support a worthy cause. The Lions Foundation of Canada Pet Value Walk for Dog Guides is taking place on Saturday, May 25th at the Gunnery Picnic Shelter at Henderson Lake Park in Lethbridge. The mission of this foundation is to provide dog guides at no cost to Canadians with a medical or physical disability. For more information and to register for the walk, go to walkfordogguides.com. Kick off your summer for Alberta Blue Cross and Silver Bear Group's Street Eats Festival on Saturday, June 15th, beginning at 11 a.m. at the Unmax Center parking lot. Enjoy delicious and unique food truck cuisines, a kids zone, entertainment, and an eating contest. This event is in support of Lethbridge Family Services. For more information, visit lfsfamily.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
The world was shaken by the callous mass shooting at 2 New Zealand mosques that took 50 lives at the hands of a white supremacist. Now, is this particular brand of terrorism a major threat that is likely to repeat itself often in the future? Joining me now to discuss this further is Dr. John Robson. He's an invited professor at the University of Ottawa and a National Post columnist. And John and I also used to work together for the now defunct Sun News Network in Ottawa. John, how have you been?
I've been well, thank you. How about yourself?
Good, really well. Now, John, you recently wrote an interesting piece in the National Post entitled, "Sorry, Woke Brigade, White Nationalism Isn't a Major Threat." Now, in your article, you take issue with a tweet from Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, which basically said that white supremacist terrorism needs to be at the top of the agenda in discussions about terrorism. Is Freeland wrong?
She's completely wrong. And it's important to realize that she said that at the United Nations. So she wasn't even talking about Canada, where I think proportionally white nationalism is probably a larger threat than it is globally. Around the world, something like 20,000 people a year are killed by terrorists. And very, very few of them are killed by white nationalists. In most countries, none at all. And what I thought was especially odd about this is that she seemed to be thinking only about Western countries and the things that happen here. That in a way, most of those people are invisible to her because the attacks happen in countries like Nigeria. And it seems so strange that our very globally minded, very woke foreign minister would just brush aside thousands of deaths. So, well, that doesn't interest us very much. And then, of course, we had the attack in Sri Lanka. And well, okay, is this not evidence that perhaps the real threat is Islamist terror, which in fact claims the majority of those lives? And most of the victims, I should emphasize, are not white. They're not Christian. They're mostly other Muslims. That's who's being killed by terrorists. And if we care about them, we should care about who's killing them.
So you're not saying that white supremacy is not a problem, but in comparison to the other types of terrorism that take place around the world, this one is nowhere near the top.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's not like it's a contest. It's not like it doesn't matter if white nationalists kill somebody, or as in the case of New Zealand, kill dozens of people. And that shooter, though his manifesto is a bit confused, he seems to have been a genuine white nationalist, that he targeted Muslims primarily because they weren't white. And he didn't like Muslims either. But, I mean, white nationalist, it's a complicated term. And as I point out in the piece, when you look at the major killings in the 20th century, and the biggest killers are Mao, Stalin, and Hitler. And Mao is ethnic Chinese killing other ethnic Chinese. Stalin is white. He's killing other white people. He primarily targets Ukrainians in his man-made famine for cultural reasons, because they are individual farmers, and he's trying to impose collectivism. And Hitler's victims primarily were Jews, who, of course, it's ethnic and religious, but the Jews were as white as the Germans who were killing them. So you look around the world for the harm done by white nationalism or by white racism, of course, what you primarily see is racial slavery, a terrible evil over centuries. And I'm by no means minimizing that, or the fact that these white nationalists, squalid as they are, aspire to be dangerous, and they do sometimes manage it. But what I'm saying is the biggest killers are Islamists. And so if your idea is that we should stop every death we can due to terrorism, you look at who's killing the most people and you put them at the top of the list, and it's not white nationalists.
So do you think maybe Chrystia Freeland tweeted this about white supremacy and the terrorism just to simply score some political correct points with a liberal base?
Well, one is tempted to ascribe things to cynicism in politics, partly because Dumas once said that he preferred rogues to fools because rogues took vacations, and they know what they're doing. The trouble is with politicians, so often what you see is what you get. That you go, they can't be that shallow, and then you go, yeah, that really was all they had. That this is her woke, politically correct way of thinking about the world. And I wish that it was pretense and that secretly she was telling the Canadian security services, okay, watch out for ISIL, watch out for these guys, and also watch out for white nationalists and other, watch everything, but whoever guards everything guards nothing. So I wish I could just say, no, it's okay. It was just cynical. She knows what she's doing. But, I've watched politics for a lot of years, and when they say something utterly foolish about economics, it is what they think. When they say something utterly foolish about budgeting, it is what they think. When they say something utterly foolish about security, it is what they think.
John, let me ask you something. Why is it that a lot of the mainstream media and politicians want us to feel guilty about being middle-aged white men? Or just being white, period? What's going on right now? Why is there that trend?
The great strength of Western civilization has always been its capacity for self-criticism. And we shouldn't regard it as a bad thing. It's why the West has done so well over the years, because we always ask ourselves what we're doing wrong. But it can turn into something resembling self-hatred. I remember years ago, Vladimir Bukovsky's a Soviet dissident, and he said that American liberals are like the backward dog of Russian folklore. They wag their tail at strangers and they bark at their own family. And I think it just goes overboard, and we forget when people talk about, oh, patriarchy, and isn't patriarchy awful? If you want real, terrible patriarchy, out of control, violent and murderous, look at the Islamists, because they are the male supremacists supreme on this planet. And instead you get Sunara Tobani saying, well, we'll never get rid of oppression of women until Western influence is eradicated. Good heavens, the West is the only place that ever tried to deal with the inequality of women. And I think these people just have hold of the wrong thing. They've lost their sense of perspective. And as a result, they fail to understand that the fact that we admit to our wrongs and we try to make amends for them. We look at slavery and say, how could the established institutions of Western society not have seen the evil of this form of racism? That's not because we're evil. It's because we're trying very hard to be good. We're asking, what did we get wrong? How can we get it better? And they should be happy about that. They shouldn't look at it and say, so you admit it. But too often that's what they do.
Now, federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer was accused recently of Islamophobia because he did not specifically say that the victims of the New Zealand shootings were Muslim. How should public figures really handle these kinds of things?
Well, I think they should not second guess themselves. They should speak the truth. And, it's interesting because there was both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton tweeted about the massacre in Sri Lanka and about Easter worshippers. Neither of them said the word Christian. Like, who worships Easter? Like, she was passé back when the Venerable Bede was writing. But nobody picks on them and says, hey, why don't you say the word Christian? But why didn't Andrew Scheer say they were Muslims? I mean, they're worshiping in a mosque. It doesn't take a lot of wit to figure out that they were Muslims, and indeed that they were targeted. As I say, I think first because they were non-white, but second because they were Muslim. It's quite clear that this was part of the murderous hatred directed at them. So just say, somebody murdered a bunch of Muslims. But at the same time, the liberal angle that Andrew Scheer is somehow, a secret Klansman minus the hood, that he's in bed with the white nationalists, that he probably is a white supremacist. Oh, come off it. Andrew Scheer is one of the nicest guys you could ever meet. He might have bad policies. He might be, kind of a milquetoast as a politician. But a white supremacist? And again, you'd think, please tell me it's cynical, that they know he's not really. But the trouble is, with politicians, so often what you see is what you get. That's really how they think.
The Calgary Stampede a couple of years ago, I had the chance to interview Andrew Scheer, and I got to tell you, he's one of the most humble, down-to-earth, approachable politicians you're ever going to meet. Now, you wrote about Nidal Hassan, who killed 13 people at Fort Hood in 2009, and what the Obama administration insisted was workplace violence. What effect does that have on the public if our leaders continue to frame things this way?
Well, to some extent it misleads them, but to some extent it drives them nuts, and they get alienated from mainstream politics. People look at Donald Trump and say, how could this man have won the election? And I didn't think he could either. But part of it, I think, is that a lot of ordinary people are fed up with this kind of walking on eggshells and refusing to tell the truth, refusing to give the Purple Heart to the people wounded in that shooting because it wasn't related to their service in the military. I mean, that's just so mean and petty. And what do you think, we don't know that he was shouting Allahu Akbar? You think we don't know what it means? Or you think, well, we'll turn against Muslims and unless you pretend that this guy wasn't an Islamist? No, we're just going to think you're lying to us and you're idiots. So I don't know what they hope to accomplish, but it achieves the opposite. Again, as I said about Andrew Scheer, I say the same thing about Justin Trudeau and Barack Obama and everybody. Talk to us like adults. Admit it when something happens that doesn't quite fit your narrative of the world, and then explain to us why you're still right. Don't start evading and getting all slippery, because then we just stop trusting you.
So, John, you say you wish more of our leaders would be concerned more about anti-Christian violence internationally, countries like China, North Korea, Pakistan, what happened in Sri Lanka. Tell me more about that.
In many respects, although Muslims are most likely to be victims of terrorism in the world, Christians are the most persecuted religion. They're being driven out of the Middle East, including, the traditional homeland of Christianity. And there's kind of a feeling of, well, if we stand up for them, we're being bigoted, we're being patriarchal, we're being white nationalists, so don't mention it, as though it were okay because they're like us. Which maybe is one step above thinking it's okay if people are not like us are being persecuted, but it's not much of a step. The Chinese government is targeting them. If what is being done to Christians around the world were being done to Muslims, there'd be a huge outcry. If it were being done to Jews, I think there'd be more of an outcry, though anti-Semitism is a rising danger in our society. Too much of the left says they're anti-Zionist, and what they mean is they're anti-Semitic. There's just no getting around it. This weird, distorted news we get out of the Middle East, a fixation on Israeli atrocities, a great number of which are made up, and virtually no attention to the terrible things the Palestinians are doing to each other and, when they can, to Israelis as well. It's amazing the number of times people say, well, if only Israel was reasonable, there'd be peace in the Middle East. You look at what's on Palestinian TV, and in Israel's neighbors, the blood libel is mainstream. That's where the problem is. But for all the horrors of anti-Semitism on a per capita basis, the worst persecution is against Christians. And we shouldn't call them Easter worshippers. We should call them Christians. We should insist that they have a right to live in peace. And as with anti-Semitism, we should regard anti-Christian violence as not just bad in itself, but as a worrying sign of the tenor of a society or a government.
You know, John, anti-Semitism is definitely on the rise. We've had those stories here on Bridge City News as well. What needs to change in the way Western governments and the United Nations respond to this?
Well, the United Nations, I've long thought, should be dismantled brick by brick and thrown into the East River. So phooey to the United Nations, you know. Anti-Semitism is sort of popular there, and you're not going to get that fixed because so many governments at the United Nations are nasty, illegitimate, and anti-Semitic. But Western governments, again, should not grovel. They shouldn't pretend we're not wrong when we're wrong. They shouldn't pretend that our history is pristine, but they should be proud of the fact that we and we alone, just about in the world, look back at our history and say, what did we do wrong? Instead of saying, we're the greatest, on often the most astoundingly spurious grounds. And they should say Christianity did not cause the world's problems. For instance, Christianity was instrumental in abolishing slavery. There was slavery under Christianity, and there was racial slavery. But the difference is that Christianity also had abolitionist movements, and those simply don't exist elsewhere in the world. And that's something we should be proud of. We should be proud of the fact that the push for rights for women is uniquely Western. We should be proud of the fact that individual freedom and the notion that the individual is made in the image of God and has inherent dignity are Western ideas. We should be proud of Magna Carta, and we should say we must always strive to live up to those ideals. We must confess and repent when we don't. But we shouldn't pretend that people who scorn those ideals are better than people who sometimes fall short of them. We should be proud of the Western tradition. That doesn't mean being white nationalists. Anybody who cherishes Magna Carta is welcome. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter if your ancestors were on the other side of the world from Runnymede in 1215. That has nothing to do with it. But our tradition is a great treasure, and we should cherish it, and we should be proud of it.
Does the conversation also tie into some degree with our immigration and national security policies? Do we really need to change something in the way we screen or vet potential terrorists finding their way to live in Canada?
I think we certainly need to do that. And I think we ought to have an immigration policy that favors the kind of people who want to come to Canada because of what it's like. Somehow that, too, is regarded as bigoted, that we should want immigrants who want to make Canada like the place they came from or indeed fled from. And again, you know, immigration is a very top-of-mind issue. It's one of the reasons Donald Trump won. And if people are going around saying only fascists want to control immigration, the danger is that ordinary people are going to go, gosh, I must be a fascist. Who knew that? There's no reason why we shouldn't be selecting immigrants who want to be Canadian. But for that, again, we have to be proud to be Canadian. And again, yes, our national security policy on immigration needs to be aware that bad guys are trying to get into the country, and we shouldn't be shy about trying to keep them out. That's not bigoted. That's just being rational, including in the interest of all the law-abiding immigrants who come here, including if immigrants are coming here from a country with a powerful Islamist terrorist movement, the last thing they want is for those guys to come in next to them. They're coming here to get away from that stuff.
John, let me ask you something. You and I go out for coffee, and I sit down with you and I ask you, John, how would you describe a Canadian? How would you define a Canadian?
Well, I would define a Canadian, you see, as someone who is born free. Remember, it was Wilfrid Laurier who said Canada was free and freedom is its nationality. Canadians always had small government. They cherished Magna Carta. They believed very much in free speech. They even, you know, until fairly recently, they believed in the right to bear arms. This astounds people. But you look at what Sir John A. Macdonald said about the subject, and he said, gun control just disarms the law-abiding and leaves weapons in the hands of the rowdies. Canadians always had a small government because they were big. That's how this country ought to be. And the idea that Canadians have embraced big government, it's historically wrong and it's insulting that we can't do things for ourselves, including charity. So this might sound like I've mistaken this for some other country, particularly, say, the southern United States, but that's just because people don't understand our heritage. They don't understand who we are, why Canadians were so formidable in 2 world wars. It was to do, I mean, part of it was, yes, proficiency with arms, but mostly it was to do with a habit of self-government. Our privates, our corporals, our junior commissioned officers could take the initiative on the battlefield without discipline breaking down. This is a remarkable thing, and it's because we're part of the West. It's because we were founded on Magna Carta. And so to me, every immigrant who comes into this country, when they are made a citizen and they take the oath, I wish we would hand them a copy of Magna Carta and say, now it's yours. Congratulations.
And there you have it. National Post columnist Dr. John Robson, thanks a lot for joining me today from Ottawa.
My pleasure.
We have a few too many possessions piling up in our home. Is it time to simplify and declutter? Joining us now via Skype to discuss this is Courtney Ellis. She co-pastors a Presbyterian church in Southern California and is author of the book Uncluttered, Free Your Space, Free Your Schedule, Free Your Soul. Also joining me in studio is one of our newest contributors, Catherine Furukawa. Welcome to both of you ladies. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me too.
You bet. Courtney, this book comes out with a lot of your own personal struggles with clutter. You say that you felt maybe a little overwhelmed at times. Let's start with that.
I did. I was feeling overwhelmed almost all the time, and I couldn't figure out why, because my life was pretty great. I worked at a church I loved, had a good marriage, healthy kids, but I felt like I could barely breathe, and so something was wrong. I just didn't know what.
Now, our society seems to love having stuff. I know, personally, I love going to antique stores. I'm a bit of a Hot Wheels collector. I like to go to garage sales. How about you, Catherine?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
We've got lots of stuff.
Lots of stuff, too? So maybe we tell ourselves that we need all of this. But Courtney, is it maybe a problem sometimes having a little too much stuff?
Absolutely. At a certain point, we're not owning our possessions. They're starting to own us. Everything we have takes up space. We have to care for it. We have to dust it. We have to store it. And at a certain point, more isn't more. More is actually less.
I guess maybe, yeah, because you're allocating a lot of time towards your stuff, right? So how do you go about getting rid of your stuff, you know? For many people, it's hard to let go because we have so many maybe memories attached to them. Catherine, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I am in the process of getting rid of stuff that's baby stuff that we don't need anymore. And there's certainly a sentimental value tied to some of that I'm not willing to give up just yet.
Like maybe the baby shoes, the baby booties?
Yeah, there's some shoes. Yeah. The rocking chair in particular is one of those things that I've spent a lot of time in, and I'm not ready to give up the rocking chair even though I don't need it anymore.
So Courtney, how do we get rid of that stuff when it has so much sentimental value?
I think that's really the question, isn't it? Because at a certain point, the object isn't just an object. It's memories, it's nostalgia, it's belief that we will one day fit into our high school jeans again, right? If we just hold on to them long enough. And so we have to start asking the question, not what should I let go of, but what do I actually need to keep? Look at what's on that shelf and don't say, what should I get rid of? But say, what do I actually use? What makes my life better? What do I actually need? And that's how I began asking the question. It wasn't a question of, should I get rid of this or not? It was a question of, do I actually need to keep this or not? And the less I had, the lighter I started to feel.
So less was more, right?
It was definitely more in all of the best ways.
So what sorts of things did you get rid of then?
I think the one thing that might resonate best with your audience is I played high school ice hockey, and so I had a pair of skates that I just wasn't going to get rid of. But I was in high school a really long time ago, and I live in Southern California now, and there's not a lot of ice. So finally I had to say, I'm going to not only let go of these skates, but let go of that person I used to be. I'm different now. I do different things with my time, and that's okay. And these skates can bless someone else. Used hockey equipment, that's, you know, we've all benefited from that at some point. So to let those skates go and develop more room for other things.
And what's the rule of thumb sometimes too, if you haven't used something in a year, you know, you can donate it, maybe throw it away. How about you, Catherine? Do you guys have that rule at home as well?
Yeah, definitely. We recently, well, I guess not recently now, a year and a half ago moved, and I'm now at the point going, okay, if I haven't used it since we moved, it's time to get rid of it. So the piles have started to accumulate, and I'm ready to start giving stuff away.
Do you do garage sales as well?
I haven't yet.
Oh, they're fun.
I like going to garage sales, so I guess.
So you're collecting more stuff,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Well, let me ask you something, Courtney. When it comes to shopping, a lot of us like to shop. Like for me, I like to shop for chocolate. I'm a bit of a chocoholic. What is your weakness when it comes to shopping?
Oh, I've got a chocolate thing. I'm right there with you.
Okay.
I think my weakness is the clearance rack at the department store. So it's okay to buy a new sweater if it's only $10 or only $5, right? I'm quite a bargain hunter. But each of those things, again, it takes time, it takes care, it takes effort. And I needed to start asking the question, why do I want to do this impulse shopping? What is so fun for me about this? What am I really hungry for? And it wasn't that I was hungry for a sweater, it's that I was hungry for something new. But it's not wrong. Yeah, exactly. And the chocolate is great because you consume it and then it's gone. It doesn't take up room. It doesn't add clutter. So you should just keep buying the chocolate. I'm all for that.
Okay. Catherine, how about you? What are some of your weaknesses when you go out shopping?
I'm right with Courtney. I'm all about a good deal. And so that sale rack is definitely my weakness. I like shoes. I like clothes.
And you're looking out for the kids too, your girls,
Oh,
right?
yes.
Like back to school supplies
Yep.
and
Always looking out for those kids too, making sure. And seasons change, especially up here. Our seasons are so diverse that you need a completely different wardrobe for every season.
You know, a big part of clutter is not necessarily physical things, but sometimes doing too many things too, cluttering up our lives. Sometimes they're good things, but they can add up. So how can we, Courtney, kind of sort out what is necessary and what's not necessarily necessary?
That's a great way to put it, because too much of a good thing is too much, and then it's no longer a good thing. And for me, those feelings of being overwhelmed were less about the physical clutter, even though I had to get rid of things like the hockey skates, and more about my schedule. It was just packed to the gills. I didn't have time to breathe. And so I had to start saying, not just what is a good thing to do, but what does God have for me in this season? Because our lives go through these cycles of different seasons. I have young kids, and so apparently sleep is not in the cards for me right now in this season. But that meant I needed to have fewer activities so that I had time to recharge and rejuvenate. Good things are good things, but when there are too many of them, they wear us down and they wear us out. And that's not how God wants us to live. God's call is a call to freedom and to life and to hope and to peace, and not to running ourselves ragged, not for God and not for anyone.
And you have to spend more time with God as well when you unclutter, get rid of a lot of the other things in your lives. But you've got young children now, Catherine. They take up a lot of your time. Let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah, they definitely do. I mean, we've got ballet to get to, and swimming and skating and school. So it's always busy with kids. And in our house, we've tried to make our weekends sacred because my husband's not working. And so it's very rare that we would plan something on a Saturday or Sunday. Those are sacred family times that we try to keep sacred. I mean, obviously there's the odd thing that pops up, but during the day on Saturday and Sunday, we try to keep those times free in our lives because that's something for us that's important.
Okay, I've got a question for both of you ladies. If you had to give something up that you're participating in your community or your church to try and make more time to rejuvenate your body, mind, and spirit and spend more time with God, what would be that one thing you would give up? I'll start with you, Catherine.
Oh, man. I don't know.
Binge watching, maybe your favorite TV
maybe
show?
that would be it.
Yeah.
Netflix. I'd have to give up Netflix, I think.
Okay. Courtney, how about you? What would you give up?
I'm just going to stop cleaning the house.
Okay.
I can get on board with that one too.
Well, your hubby can help you out with that, right?
That would be great. No, I think that often we give away our time in these little bits. It's less, I need to give up swim lessons, and it's more, if I don't log onto my phone all the time throughout the day, that adds up to hours. Hours of brain space, hours of prayer time, hours of being able to connect with my husband, with my friends. And one of the things the book talks about is paring down our digital connection, so that it's not that a cell phone is bad. I have a smartphone that I use, but when we create boundaries around that, suddenly we get a lot of our time back.
You know, that's a good point. I know a lot of people spend hours upon hours on Facebook or Twitter. They're tweeting, they're hanging out with the trolls, or they're going on Instagram, or whatever the case, Pinterest, getting a new recipe perhaps. So how do you try and limit yourself and put those limits or boundaries within yourself and your family? How do you do that when it comes to social media?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because there are 1,000 engineers on the other side of that screen. Often we just think it's us and our weak willpower, just us versus the cell phone, but it's not. There are so many people on the other side that make money if we click or scroll or log on. And so what I've found is I have to create some hurdles for me to get online. So my smartphone doesn't have an internet browser anymore. I have to be at an actual computer to get on social media, which means when I'm out, I don't have to think, oh, I shouldn't get on Facebook. I just can't get on Facebook. And suddenly I'm noticing my kids and I'm talking to my neighbor, and I don't have to make myself do it. It's just been done for me. And that's been part of the key for me and reducing that decision fatigue.
That's wonderful. That's great, putting those kind of parameters around your social media. Catherine, how about for you?
I've done the same thing. I haven't currently, but I have before taken Facebook and Instagram off my phone so that I have to, same thing, on a computer or on an iPad, which I've certainly noticed that difference as well, that you have to be intentional about logging on instead of it being mindless. But at the moment, I will confess that I have everything, the app right on my phone, and the access is easy in there, and
Little
certainly
FaceTime
yeah.
and Messenger.
Yeah, always.
Courtney, can you explain what hospitality has to do with uncluttering our lives? Is because that just sounds like a lot more work.
It does, doesn't it? I think I set out to write this book because I was overwhelmed and I needed less in my life. And the biggest surprise was that as I pared down, as I got rid of unnecessary possessions and unnecessary events and did less in the digital world, God started to fill my open hands with more wonderful things. So the gift of Sabbath, the gift of hospitality, the gift of connecting with my neighbors and my friends in deeper ways. Because it isn't that God wants us to have less. It's that when our hands are full, God can't give us these good gifts. And so the book started out being about less and ended up being about more. Because when we're not so stressed out about taking care of our possessions, our homes, making everything perfect, it's easier to invite other people in and say, just come in, have dinner, right? Rather than, well, you can come over in 2 weeks because there are a lot of Legos on the floor right now.
So what are some practical ways you've taught your kids to embrace godly simplicity?
You know, our kids have really flourished when we've started practicing Sabbath more regularly. I love that Catherine talked about the weekends being sacred. For us, my husband and I are pastors, so usually it's Friday or Saturday, but we say on that day, we're going to rest and we're going to play and we're going to worship, and you get donuts. And so the kids love Sabbath because Sabbath means donuts. But we celebrate each other and we're able to rest because we're not running from one thing to the next all day long. And it's been a great gift, and they look forward to it every week. Uninterrupted time with mom and dad. It's a gift.
So Catherine, how about you? Have you taught your kids to really embrace godly simplicity?
I would say probably not intentionally. They know that Sunday is a day where...
Do you have rest?
Yeah, a day
Worship?
of rest. We go to church, we come home, we spend time as a family. We often have my parents or my husband's parents over for dinner that night, and it's just a family day for us. I don't know that we've necessarily intentionally called it a Sabbath, which probably we should start introducing that as part of our language in our home, that this is why we're doing this, and it's a godly principle that we need to exercise in our home.
Amen. So Courtney, let me ask you something. What are some practical ways you've taught your kids to basically be generous with finances? And does that have a way of uncluttering our life too, for yourselves and for your children?
Absolutely. When we start understanding everything we have as a gift, it becomes much more easy to be generous, to practice generosity. My oldest son is almost 6 years old, and he doesn't understand money as much as he understands toys. So we've started to say, when you have more than you need of something, it's great to share it with someone. And he went through his Matchbox car collection and said, I don't play with all these. Maybe someone else would like them. Yeah, we'll send them to you. But we walked down the block and he offered them to a friend and, taught him to live life with open hands, that he didn't have to give away his most special car. But there were a few that were still in great shape that he didn't play with as much. And can he be generous with those? Yeah, he can. And it lit him up. It lit up that neighbor kid. And he learned a lesson about the God who is generous with us.
I'll let you in on a little secret. Some of these classic cars, like some of the classic Hot Wheels from the late 60s, early 70s, they're going for over $100,000 each now. So
wow. So we should go get those back.
And they don't take up a lot of space. You're not going to feel too cluttered with those little Hot Wheels, right? So let me ask
Not
you
until
something.
you get a lot of them.
Are you, well, that's true too. I've only got about 50 or 60. But anyway, are you completely uncluttered now, or is it still an ongoing journey for yourself?
It is a constant process. It's a continual process because, you know, we live in the Western world where we live in a land of abundance. There's just a lot of stuff, and we don't even have to spend a lot to get a lot of stuff. The dollar store can give you a lot of stuff. And so it's a constant process. We're forever taking things to the thrift store. We're forever saying, does this need to stay or can it go? But that's part of the lesson. If we could just do it once and be done, we wouldn't need to rely on God in the same way. But this is a dance where God is continually teaching us and calling us forth. But I love the cover of the book because it encapsulates this idea that we're lighter when we undertake this journey, that it lifts this burden off of us. And that's what we've learned, that it's okay that it's never over because there are lessons all along the way.
So Catherine, you talked a little bit earlier about how you're uncluttering some of your kids' clothes, but at the same time, I mean, the girls are little, they like toys, they like a lot of stuff too. Maybe you're not quite at that stage in your life yet for you and your family where you're going to unclutter. It's more like you're collecting some things right now.
We are, definitely some. We try, though, to be diligent about as we outgrow toys, to pass them on. At my daughter's school, they actually had a used toy sale right after Christmas, which was great. So all the kids brought in toys, and then they sold them similar to a garage sale at the school, and it was a great way to unload some stuff. Unfortunately, we also sent a loonie to school with our daughter, so she came home with some stuff. But we definitely unloaded more than she came home with. So I guess overall it was a win.
Oh, and that's right. Courtney Ellis, author of Uncluttered, Free Your Space, Free Your Schedule, Free Your Soul. And Catherine Furukawa, one of our regular contributors now with BCN. Ladies, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, unclutter, and have a great night.